In CIST 1530, Adobe Photoshop Reveal, we'll start with Chapter 2. We're going to look at painting, selecting, and moving pixels. In this chapter, we will go through the lecture, and then we'll do some demonstrations on Photoshop and look at some tips and techniques that you can use to accomplish these tasks. First, we're going to look at filling with color. So filling is one of the first commands most people learn within Photoshop. So what this means is to change the color. So you're going to choose a color and you're going to fill the work area on your canvas with that color. Now there's a couple ways you can do the fill command. You can use the fill command on the edit menu that will take you to the fill dialog box. When there, you can use it to fill a selection or the entire canvas with either the foreground or background colors or any other colors available in the dialog box. So what we're doing is we're changing the colors of pixels. So all of our digital images are going to be made up of small squares that are called pixels. It's a combination of two words, a picture and an element. So this is the smallest component that we can get is the pixel. The pixels are only one color. So a pixel is either black or white or red, pink, peach, gray, green, brown, whatever color it is, it's only that one color. There's no shades in a pixel. There's also no blends of colors. So keep in mind that a pixel is one color and one color only. Now, when we're talking about images, one of the things we need to discuss is image resolutions. So when we see that image, we're going to see this and not pixels because those pixels are so small. This is when we're talking about the number of pixels per inch. This is called the resolution of the image, and it's measured in the PPI, the pixels per inch. So most on-screen presentations, such as the slideshow, an on-screen image, they're going to say with a resolution of 72 PPIs. High-quality printing, generally going to start somewhere around the 300 PPIs. Personally, when I do high-resolution printing on banners and things of that nature, I use 600 PPIs, which means that I have 600 pixels that will be in 1 inch. So the higher quality your resolution, the better quality your print will be. Now, when you want to modify just some of those pixels on the canvas, you need to first make a selection. Now, a couple selection tools we'll talk about include the marquee tools, the rectangular marquee tool, and the elliptical marquee tool. Also, the lasso tool that allows you to make a freehand selection. There are a couple different lasso tools we'll look at as well. We see an example here of the fill dialog box. The contents, you can choose the foreground color, background color. You have other options. In here, you have a blending mode that you can set, we will discuss, and then the opacity. You can also use the brush tool. This is going to be Photoshop's version of a paintbrush. So with this also allows you to manipulate the color of those individual pixels to change the way your image looks. So to use the brush tool, you click and drag it to paint. So it's always going to paint with a foreground color. Keep that in mind that you can switch colors, but it's always going to use the foreground color. You can also single click the brush and then shift click the brush on a different area of the canvas because that's going to allow you to paint a straight brush stroke that's automatically going to be painted between those 2 points. So when you click on the brush tool in the toolbar, you're going to have an option panel. It's going to show you the settings for that brush tool and also the brush preset picker. Keep in mind that the brush tool size is going to be measured in pixels. So we'll look at some of the options here that we'll see on the brush settings. You'll see that you have a home button. You have the different brushes, the different brush size, the modes, and the opacity. Now the brush size, you can adjust the brush sizes and the hardness. So the hardness is measured in percentages. 100% hardness is going to produce a brush with a well-defined smooth edge. 0 produces a brush with a very soft edge that's going to fade or blend. So these soft brushes are often referred to as having a feathered edge. Now, even when you have a 0 hardness setting, though, the center of the brush tool is still painting 100% on the foreground color. So we're going to take a second here. We'll flip over to Photoshop, and we'll look at some of these concepts that we've went over here. One is using the fill color. Now you'll see that I've got a white canvas. This is my color picker down in this area. So right now I've got 2 different colors. This restores me back to my default color. So I'm going to restore this back to black and white. Now if I want to choose a different color, I can simply click on one of the color swatches. And then in my color picker, I have the option here of changing the color. I can use the hue, saturation, brightness, the red, green, blue, or red, green, black, different colors I can set, or I can just pick a color. So I'm going to say I like this color blue. So I'm going to click OK. You can see that my foreground color changes. You also notice that I have the lock on my layers. So my layers panel, this means I can't change anything. So I can right click this and choose layer from background. I'm just going to leave this as layer 0. Everything's set the same and click OK. So now I can edit those pixels. Now I can come up to edit and come down to fill. And this gives me my fill dialog box. Now in the contents, I do have some options here. I can choose the foreground color, the background color, or I can choose a color from this area. So I can skip the step I made here. Content aware we will cover later in the course. I can also choose a pattern. I can choose to fill it with black, 50% gray, or white. So I'm going to choose the foreground color. I'll leave the blending mode at normal and leave the opacity at 100%. The opacity is how much can I see through this. So I'm going to click OK, and I've changed and used the fill to change the color of my background. Another way I can do this is by using the paint bucket tool. So by using the paint bucket tool, I'm going to click and then I will fill that with the color that is my foreground color. We did talk about being able to make a selection and fill in just that area. So I'm going to use my rectangular marquee tool and we'll cover this. And I'm going to just drag an area. So if I just want this area filled, I'm going to go to edit fill, click OK, and then I've created the fill for just this area. So Photoshop gives you multiple ways to accomplish the same task. Now I'm going to pull out some images here. So the stop sign, we'll look at some of the ways we can make selections. So you see in our tools panel, we do have the different marquee tools. So we have a rectangular marquee tool, and you'll see that I can click and drag over the area, and that makes that selection of what is inside of this. I can also use the elliptical, which is going to draw a elliptical selection. Also under here, we talked about the lasso tool. So the lasso tool allows me to click and drag to make a freehand selection. So you have multiple ways you can make selections, and there are more selection tools than this. We'll see that we have a polygonal lasso tool, magnetic lasso tool. You also have a magic wand, object selection tool, quick selection tool. We will cover those. These are just some of the basic tools to make selections. Also on our tool panel, we'll see that we have our brush tool. So this allows us to paint areas. So I'm going to go back to a white canvas. I'm going to create a layer. Once again, I've got the foreground color. The paintbrush is only going to paint my foreground color. In my option bar, I do have some different options set up here that I can presets. The tool presets. This is where I will change the size of my brush. So I'm going to change this to 50 pixels. This is where I can also adjust the hardness. And then I have some general preset brush tips that I can use here as well. Right now, I'm going to leave this on 100% and 50 pixels. My blending mode is normal. My opacity is at 100%. This allows me to set the pressure. We'll cover that in the flow. And then also I can have like an airbrush effect as well. So I'm going to choose my smoothing to 100%. I can adjust angles. And then also I can use pressure for the size and then other options as well. So for this example, I'm just going to leave it as I have set. And you'll see that when I click and drag, so this is my hardness set at 100%. I select the right tool. We'll see the hardness set at 50%. And then we'll set it at 0%. So you can see how the hardness will play a difference on the edges of your brush strokes. Now, as I said, the opacity setting, that means the word opaque does not mean see-through, but it allows you to change the flow of it. So 100% um, opacity means that the brush paints at 100% opaque, so you cannot see through it. 50% you can see somewhat through it. So we'll take a quick look at that. So once again, I'm going to change the opacity here. So we'll see it at 100%. Let me change the hardness back to 100. So at 100%, put it roughly at 50%, 49, and then we'll do 1%. Okay, so you can't even see the 1%. Now I'm going to put this on a black background. And so you can see how that your background, it will affect the color of your image when you're working with the opacity as well. Now this is something that can be done not only with paint brushes, but also you can change images. So once we're getting further into Photoshop, we can composite images, and based on that, the opacity will change the way the images look. The blending modes are also available for painting and superposing images and colors on our layers panel. So the basic definition of the blending mode is a computer algorithm that controls how the overlapping colors interact with each other. Now, when you have that brush tool selected, the option panel is going to display the mode setting. So when you click, the list area is going to reveal the blending modes available to you that you can paint with. So having the brush tool selected, we go back to our canvas. You'll see the mode here. So we have all kinds of different modes that we can go through, and we can choose and how changing the mode can change the color of the image and how it interacts with the image behind it, the colors behind it. Now, a couple of these blending modes we'll talk about, the normal and multiply blending modes. So this is going to be the default for the brush tools are normal, which you can think of this as no blending mode at all. So with this, if you have, an example here is a bright yellow canvas and you decide to paint with cayenne, so those pixels are going to change to the new color. Now, when you use the multiply blending mode, you paint a canvas yellow with a cyan brush, it yields green wherever you paint. So the multiply blending mode causes the brush tools to paint with a transparent paint. So we see an example here. We've got the painting, the yellow of the left eye. In the right, we've got overlapping transparent paint strokes in the right eye. You see it set over here. So let's look at the different blending modes. And we'll use the same example they have here. So first I'm going to choose a yellow. And I'm going to adjust my brush. And I'm going to paint in a normal paint. So I'm not going to do this really well, just for time purposes. We'll see how this changes. So with a normal blending mode, if I'm going to paint over this, it'll just change those pixel colors. The one I'm going to be using will be our multiply now. So I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. And you'll see how it changes the colors. Even though I didn't change the color, by changing the blending mode, it changes my final look of my image. So the multiply mode, so the black pixels with multiply mode, they cannot be altered by any other colors, which makes the multiply mode ideal for painting white areas of the images without affecting the black areas. So if the overlap paint strokes the same color, darker color will appear where they intersect. Also, multiply mode, the only colors that don't create darker shades where they overlap themselves are the 6 primary colors: the red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow. Now, the reason for this is because that the first 3 are the additive primary colors and the last 3 are subtractive primary colors. So we see an example here of the multiply mode where they have painted over. Notice it did not change the black of the strokes of the images, the pixels. Now the darker color blending mode, this is just a straightforward algorithm. It's where 2 colors overlap, the darker color will dominate and replace the lighter color. When you paint with the darker color blending mode, and this is going to be something that's similar as the multiply blending mode, this leaves the black pixels unaffected by any other color. The reason why is simply because there's no color darker than black. So we look at examples here, the multiply blending mode and how the colors look when they overlap versus the darker color blending mode. Now, a composite image is one in which many different images are brought together in a composition to create a single image or effect. So looking at these, when I open up an image, so for example, in this image here, I have multiple images here that I can use as a way to make a composition. Now, in this situation, I would want to use one of my selection tools to select those. And I generally do this based on the shape. So for example, I want to select this area. I can select this, choose the move tool, and then when I move this, you'll see that it becomes its own selection. Now, a couple other things I can do with this. I can come up to, let me undo this. So I can make my selection. I can come up to layer, go to new, and then I can make a new layer from my selection, either the cut or copy. So I'm going to make a new layer via copy, and I'm going to leave my original there. You'll see on the layer panel that I do have a new layer, and I can drag this to new locations. So this is a way I can do this without changing my original image. I do have to make sure I'm on the correct layer. So I can reposition these images to the correct location using a selection tool and either the move tool, or I can use the create a new layer. So we talked about some of the selection tools, the marquee tools, the lasso tools. There are also tolerance-based tools such as your magic wand, your quick selection, or your object selection tool. So the marquee selection tools, these are your most basic selection tools. The two that's most used are probably going to be the rectangular marquee tool, which allows you to make a rectangle or square selection, and then the elliptical, which allows you to make an oval or circular selections. Now, when you make any kind of selection, you're going to see the selection marquee that's going to appear around the selection. Now, when you're making a selection, you make your selection, you can also then go in and edit that selection. So you can use the shift key to add to an existing selection, or you can use it to constrain the marquee tool so that they create a perfect square or circle when dragging. So you see that my selection that I have here for where I made the selection here is not perfect. So if I am going to fix this, so I've made my selection. You'll notice on my option bar up here, I do have some options here to add to the selection or subtract from the selection. So in this case, I'm going to select the subtract, and you'll see that when I make another selection, I am now adjusting what I have selected. Vice versa, if I want to add to this. So if I need to add, say, the dartboard in, I click add to, and then I can make that selection as well. So this allows me to modify. Feather allows me to change the edges of my selection. So let's say I'm gonna set my feather at 25 pixels. I'm gonna make my selection. You'll see how it's rounded off the edges of the selection here. And it's give it the faded look. So that's what feathering does. And you can also use the shift key to add to your selection as well. Now the lasso selection tool, this is a freeform tool. There are a couple different options you have for the lasso tool. You have the polygonal lasso tool. It's going to act like the functions of the lasso tool, but it's going to do it with straight lines. And then you have the magnetic lasso tool. These are going to add anchor points as you make your freeform selection. So it's going to try to snap to the object that you're trying to select. So we'll look at the teddy bear and how to make a selection with it. So I'm going to zoom in on this area here. And then coming up to my lasso tools. So first we'll look at the lasso tool. So when I click and I drag, this gives me the free form to make my selection. It's very easy to get pieces of this if you're going fast with this that you're not intended to, or leave pieces out. Once again, you can adjust the selection. The polygonal lasso tool, when I click, is going to make straight lines. One thing to pay attention to, and you'll see it right here, is on the lasso tool, when the lines meet to complete the connection, you'll see a little zero appear that lets you know that the circle is complete, the connection is complete. And when you click that, then the selection will be made. The magnetic lasso tool, as I said, this will try to snap to the object, and you'll see that it creates anchor points. You can also click to insert an anchor point. And once again, this tool will need to have its path completed. So once I'm finished with my selection, you'll see that once again, I have the little circle that comes out in the icon. That allows me to know that my selection is complete. So I'm going to zoom in really close here to this eye. Once again, I'm going to use the magnetic lasso tool. Maybe you can see this a little bit better here. So I'm going to make my selections. And you'll see that once my circle is complete, my selection is complete, you'll see the little circle that appears beside the icon to let me know that is complete. Now, if I don't have that, and this is a problem you'll run into with the magnetic lasso tool, or any selection tool that requires this. So if I'm close and I'm thinking I've got this complete and I move, you'll see that I'm starting to add to the selection off the side. So it's very easy to have issues with that. You can always come up and choose select and deselect to undo your selections. Now, another thing that we can look at is that if I'm making a selection and I want to change everything but this, I can also come up to select and choose inverse. Now, inverse means when I make a selection, I'm selecting everything inside of that range. So everything that's inside this, all of these white pixels. When I choose the inverse, now I've selected everything outside of my selection. So if I was to hit the delete key on my keyboard, you'll see that I've deleted everything outside of my selection. I know it's hard to see, but my selection is right here. Notice that these did not delete when I did that. That's because they are on a separate layer. You see I have different layers over here. So the action I take is only going to take effect to that layer that I had the selection made. Now, transforming a selection, when you choose to transform You make your selection. You have some options here. You can enlarge it, reduce it, rotate it, distort it. And you can use this by using the transform command on the select menu. You have a bounding box that's going to go around the marquee that allows you to use one of the 8 handles to let you click and drag and change the dimension of the image. So I'm going to put this back to 0 pixels. Actually, I'm going to get rid of these other layers. So when I make my selection, there's a couple ways I can do my transformation. This way, I can use Control T keyboard shortcut. You see I've got this bounding box that appears around my selection. And I can adjust one of these 8 handles to change what I've made my selection. And depending on what handle I use will depend on the transformation. I can also come into Edit and use one of the transform commands. So if I want to choose the skew, for example. So this changes the area of my selection. Now the Magic Wand tool, this is going to be based off a tolerance setting that's going to select the pixels with the similar colors. So we look at the tolerance settings for the Magic Wand tool. We'll look at some other options we'll have in there. The contiguous checkbox in the options panel. If you check that, you're going to specify the Magic Wand is going to select only the pixels that are touching the pixels where you click on the image. So we'll look at this Magic Wand tool with using this hot air balloon. You'll see how it's got the different colors selected. So let's look at, let me unselect this. So looking at the hot air balloon, now we'll come into the Magic Wand tool. You'll see my tolerance settings here. Right now I've got it set to 32. So I'm going to set this to 10. And I have the contiguous selected, so it's only going to select those pixels that are touching the pixels I click on. Let's say I want to choose this green color. Now notice we got green here and green over here. So when I click that, you see I've got a very small sample size that was selected. Because of my tolerance, I'm only selecting those pixels that are in that same range. So to fix this, if I want the entire green area select, I would adjust the tolerance. So I'm going to try 50. And so that's better. I've still not got everything. Once again, I can still come in and add to my selection. And adjust the tolerance and remove from the selection. As you see, I've got some of the yellow. Selected as well. Now we'll look at this by choosing the yellow. So once again, using the Magic Wand tool, 50% tolerance and the contiguous button selected, you see it's only selecting the areas that are touching. So I'm going to set this at 100%. And when I click, you'll see that now it's getting areas that are in that shades for the yellow. Now, once again, I'm going to hit delete and show you that these are now removed. Those were the colors that I had selected. So let's turn the continuous off. And see, so now with our 100%, we're still selecting basically the same amount of colors that was there. Let's set this now at 25%. So continuous, we get that. You see the difference of the selection based off having the continuous option checked. Now, a grayscale image is a single color image. This is something that you normally going to refer to as black and white. So the single color is going to be black. The image is going to be reduced from ranges of gray from black to white. A grayscale image is going to have a range of 256 gray pixels. So each pixel can be one and only one of the 256 shades of gray. So when you click the magic wand tool in the area of an image, you're only clicking on that one pixel, and that pixel is going to have a grayscale value. So black pixels have a grayscale value of 0. White pixels will have a value of 255. The values of 1 through 254 are different variations of shades of gray. A middle gray will have a grayscale value of 128. Since 0 is a number when we're selecting our pixels, we have 256 shades of gray that are available per pixel. Now our selection edges, the outline of the selection is going to be called the edge of the selection. It's either always going to be aliased or anti-aliased. An aliased edge is a hard edge. The hard edge is stair-step pixels. It's very obvious. The edges are going to be noticeably blunt, and this is something that's going to be seldomly used. An anti-aliased edge is a crisp but smoother edge. With this, Photoshop's going to create a smooth transition between the edge and its background using the many different shades of the edge pixel color. Another type of edge is a feathered edge. And we talked about this. This is a blended edge. Photoshop's going to create the blend at the edge of the selection between the selected pixels and the background image. That feathered value that we've looked at is going to be the length of the feathered edge. Now, when you apply this, that edge is equally distributed inside and outside of the selected edge. Now, one of the ways you can use a feathered edge is to create a vignette. So this is an effect which the edge of the image, and this is something that's usually done on an oval, it gradually fades away. We'll look at creating a vignette. So just to compare the different types of edge types, we have our feathered, our anti-aliased, and our aliased edges. You'll see that this has got the jagged edge. This is more smooth, and then this is more feathered out. So we'll look at creating a vignette. So if I wanted to create a vignette with this image of this person, and just for example, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to fill it with the foreground color. So to do this, I would make my selection. I'm going to put the feathered edge at 50 pixels. And then I'm going to draw my selection. Now it's not a perfect selection, but in here I'm coming into a layer, and this is called creating a layer mask as well. We will cover this later, but this is a quick way to show you how a feathered edge can be used. So go into layer mask, and then I'm going to reveal the selection. So what this is going to do is this is going to create an area. I'm not destroying the pixels. I'm just hiding the pixels that are outside of my selection. So I'll click reveal selection. You'll see that I've created the artistic effect, a vignette effect, with using the feathered edge. So this is one way that you can use a feathered edge in Photoshop to very easily uh, enhance your images. Now you can also sample pixels and save in swatches. So sampling is going to refer to taking information from a pixel um, or accessing the color of the image. One of the ways you can find the image information, the color information, is using the info panel. So in the info panel, it's going to tell you the information about that pixel's color information. You can find this by uh, putting your mouse pointer over a pixel. So it's going to give you the information broke down in terms of the RGB color, the CMYK color, the grayscale, and also the hue and saturation and brightness. Now, most designers are going to use the info panel's readouts to RGB, which is going to give you the grayscale information on the pixels. So we'll look at the info panel here, and we'll see that it's broken down into the colors here, and also the width and height and the XY coordinates of the mouse pointer. So even looking at this image here, you can come to Window and down to Info. This will open up the Info panel. And see, mine is not currently set to this, so I can come into these little options and choose the panel options. Now in here, this is where I can set the colors of the readout. So first one, I'm going to choose the mode as the RGB color. The second one's the CMYK color. This is where I can also choose the mouse coordinates, whether it would be in inches or pixels. So I'm going to leave it in inches. And I'll click OK. And we'll see that this has now been updated. So now if I want to see the color of, say, her earring, when I put my mouse pointer over it, you'll see that I do have the RGB color options here now. The reason I was not getting those is because I had the layer mask selected. So if I have this selected here, selection in your layers panels is important. Because you'll see the white bounding box, it means I have the black and white selected. So you'll see that everything is going to be 255. That's what I can see through. Now by having the layer selected, I can see the actual RGB color of this earring versus the iris of her eye versus her hair color. So you'll see how that changes with this. And now I can use this to change a color. So let's say I want to match the color of her hair right here. So it's red is 46, green is 34, and black is 24. So that would be my RGB colors. It's 46, 34, 24. So if I wanted to go to the color panel here, I can type this in. So in the RGB, I can type in 46, 34, 24. And that gives me the same color as that pixel that was in her hair. So that's one of the ways you can use the info panel. You can also use the color panel by dragging the available color sliders based on whatever your current color mode are. So when you do this, the new color you make on the color panel becomes the foreground color on the toolbar. Now the swatches panel, this has its preset colors as well as different collections of swatches such as pastel, dark, light, and pale. You can use this to create a new color swatch. So you can do this by either using the color panel or sampling a color with the eyedropper tool. And then you can save it on the swatches panel. So looking at the swatches panel, you'll see the different colors up here and the different options. And you notice when I click on this, my foreground color is changing. I can also, once again, use the color slider to choose a new color swatch. I can click the option menu here and choose to create a new swatch preset. So if this is a color I use a lot, I can choose the new swatch preset. I can give this a name. You'll notice it's the same color as my foreground color. And then I'm just going to say this is new color. I'm going to click OK. You'll notice that it's now added to my swatches panel. So this allows me to quickly reuse the color information that I have stored in this foreground color. You can also save selections. When you save a selection, Photoshop is going to create a new channel. It's called an alpha channel, and this will be on your channel's menu. So in alpha channel, it's a grayscale image. Photoshop's going to create, and it's going to use that to render the selection. When you do this, Photoshop's going to use white pixels that's going to represent pixels that are selected, and black pixels to represent those that aren't selected. So if I'm making a selection, and I'm going to use one of these other tools. So let's say I'm using the quick selection tool. So if I'm making a quick selection, and this is the selection I want to save, and come into select, come down to save selection. I can give this a name. So I'm going to name this I, and click OK. You can see in my channels now that I do have an I selection. So let me unselect this. And then when I choose that to view, so I can see where that selection is. Notice it is black for what was not selected, and then white for what I have selected. I can use this also to load a selection. So if I made the selection and I need to go back and revisit it, I can come in and choose to load the selection, and you'll see that it will put the selection I've made back into my image. All right, so to convert an RGB image, a red, green, black image, to a black and white image, you would use the grayscale mode over the image menu, on the image menu. So with this, the color data per pixel is going to be discarded, and the images are going to be rendered as a single color black and white image. Now you can also convert an image from grayscale mode to RGB color. So you do this by first posterizing the effect. That's going to reduce the range of colors in the image. We'll see an example of a grayscale image here that's been posterized. So if I want to add grayscale to an image, I'm going to hide the info panel. I can come into image and mode, and then here I can choose different color modes. So if I want to grayscale, and it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to do this? I'm going to discard this. And so now I've made the image black and white. I have made it a grayscale image. There's a lot of information thrown at you in chapter 2. This is a introduction to Photoshop. If you've never used Photoshop in the past, it may seem overwhelming. It does get easier. This is, like I said, a introduction, and there's a lot of information given to you.